The Mystery of Pain by James Hinton. Chapter 1 of The Mystery of Pain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ethan D. Gilkey. To my mother, for whom these thoughts, not uttered in words, but acted out in life, have come to me, I dedicate them as her own. This book is addressed to the sorrowful. And may be that there are some in whose lives pleasure so far outbalances pain, that the presence of the latter has never been felt by them as a mystery. It is probable that there are more who, through native strength of mind or felicity of circumstance, are able to meet the questions that arise out of it with unoppressed hearts, and who have so strong a faith in good that they can, without difficulty, resolve all forms of evil into it. To these I do not address myself. But there is another, and I think a more numerous class, to whom their own or others' pain is a daily burden, upon whose hearts it weighs with intolerable anguish. I seek to speak to these, not as a teacher, but as a fellow, sharing their feeling, and knowing well how vain is the attempt to throw off misery, or to persuade ourselves that life is better than it is. I would fain share with them also thoughts that have seemed to me capable of casting a bright gleam of light athwart the darkness, and if they are true, of bringing an immense and incredible joy out of the very bosom of distress. It seems to me, indeed, that nothing less than this will suffice, that pain must furnish its own consolation, if it is to be consoled at all, or rather that it must give more than consolation, that it must give joy. If it can be made fruitful thus, if rejoicing can be seen to be rooted in sorrow, not sometimes only, but absolutely, then at least one part of the mystery, and perhaps the hardest and darkest part, would be gone. And it is this that I think I have seen, and that I wish, if I can be so happy, to show those who need it more than myself, and who better than myself may profit by it. Let me beg the patience of one class of sufferers, and their forbearance even, with some thoughts which are herein addressed to another. No one, I think, can have had much intercourse with those who have been called upon to suffer without feeling that there are two different ways in which our pains most heavily assault them. There are some in whom the fact that they and others are called for endurance, even the endurance of unutterable pains, rouses no angry questionings, and excites no doubts. Their hearts may be bowed to the earth, but they do not murmur. They think it natural that the ways of God should be beyond mortal fathoming, and that what would seem best to our narrow vision could not be the truly good. In their deepest agony, they do not question righteousness. But there are others, I think, they are the more, the chief poignancy of whose suffering comes from the irrepressible doubt of right, a burning passion to penetrate the impenetrable meaning of their anguish. They might gird themselves up to endure, but they cannot tolerate the unreason, the waste, the seeming wrong. Their souls, which might stand erect before the utterest tortures which right could demand, or reason could inflict, writhe in impotent passion in the face of that cold, unanswering law which will spare nothing, or that cruel caprice which lays its sacrilegious choice upon the best. What they demand to see is a right and a purpose in the loss and wrong. It is a human cry, which surely God does not despise. Is it not, indeed, a faith ignorant of itself, an assurance that there must be in God's world a right, a perfect reason, which could not balk our hearts or mock our hopes if we could know it? Surely we ought not be impatient of these demands, even when they are most impatiently urged. Those who do not feel them, or those who have succeeded in hushing them within their own bosoms, may permit them to be weighted and pondered to the full for others' sakes. Perhaps, too, it may be found that these passionate questionings do not lead us altogether wrong, that God's own Spirit might be prompting them, designing to meet them with an answer, that they may be, though a faulty, yet an acceptable fulfilling of the precept, "For this thing will I be inquired of, saith the Lord." Do not our Saviour's words encourage us to seek knowledge as well as other gifts when He says, "I call you not servants, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from the Father I have made known to you"? If we knew all the things that the Father does, would our hearts be consoled? Would our sorrows be turned to joy? Does not this secret anticipation of the heart, in answer to this question, mark the distinction of the believer and the faithless? I believe that by such knowledge sorrow would be turned to joy. I think it may even be seen that it would. that we may have the knowledge now that proves it. Accustomed as we have been to the darkness, and to bear sorrow unassuaged, debarred by the loss and lapse from our privileges as Christian men, have we not almost forgotten that the Spirit is the Comforter, that the gospel claims as one of its chief ends that we might have great consolation, that God has undertaken Himself to wipe away all tears from His children's eyes, and that Christ, foretelling tribulation, has bidden us to be of good cheer? Let us recall the joyful words. Let us assure ourselves that they do verily express the truth. Let us be bold to believe them, and believing them, to look for and to welcome all agencies by which they are fulfilled. From whatever unexpected quarters, or quarters most threatening and hostile, there springs up consolation. May we not believingly recognize it as God's messenger, as His minister for fulfilling His word? Himself not unwilling to do the consoler's part, nay, rejoicing most therein. Shall we wonder that He bends all things to the same end, makes all results of human effort, all the long tale of human strife, His ministers, to do for Him His best and dearest work, to give us joy, such joy as His, to transmute our lives, and to make its dark threads translucent with the splendor of a glory like His own? Can we wonder if all that man has known or done has been working together, unknown to him indeed, but guided by God's own hand to this end, coming to us now as His ministers in our sore need, and bringing refreshing waters to us when we are thirsting unto death? For surely never has the healing water been needed more than now. Man has learnt many things, but he has not learnt how to avoid sorrow. Among his achievements, the safeguard against wretchedness is wanting. Perhaps, indeed, he could scarcely be charged with exaggeration who should hold that the aggregate of man's unhappiness has increased with this increasing culture, and that the acuter sensibility multiplied sources of distress more than outweigh the larger area from which his pleasures are drawn, and the more numerous means of alleviation at his command. At least, it appears certain that our heaping up of enjoyments, if ever it was designed as a means of producing happiness, has proved a signal failure. When we regard the general tone and feeling of our age, whether as expressed in its literature, in its social intercourse, or even more, perhaps, in its amusements, do we not find ourselves in the presence of a society from which real gladness has well nigh died out, in which hope is almost extinct? I seem to be reminded of an attempt so often made, and proved fruitless just as often, by external pleasures and multiplied distractions to beguile or at least to quiet a wounded heart. Man's heart is wounded in these latter days. The bright dreams of his youth have vanished. The outpouring of his deepest passion recoils on himself in mockery. But he can attire himself in gorgeous apparel, and fare sumptuously every day. He can lay all lands under his contribution, and make nature serve his pleasures. He can even explore all knowledge, if he will abstain from asking any question that it truly concerns his manhood to have answered. But surely it is not now an open question whether pampered luxury or gratified curiosity can heal a wounded spirit. If happiness is to revisit the earth, or, if it ever have been a stranger there, is to be strange no longer, it must come from a form of genuine joy of the heart, a satisfaction of our highest nature. It must come surrounded with light, and bring hope in its train. It must bid our largest and noblest affections spring up and blossom anew. It must visit us as a spring visits frozen lands, and make our lifeblood flow again with warm current in our veins. And there are thoughts which would do this, thoughts which are possible to us now, in some sense, indeed, now first possible to us, though open to all men since Christ and His apostles preached. Old thoughts, and yet new, as old as the gospel, yet taught us with fresh evidence and proof by the latest discoveries of science, which do not but gather up all the testimony of nature that is good news, and bid us seek beyond the visible the secret of our life. It is true, indeed, that no change in our thoughts can alter the nature of things, or invert the essential relations of pleasure and pain. No form of opinion can make bitter sweet, or cause the couch of suffering to be a grateful rest. Let us observe what is true, on the other hand. It is in the power of knowledge very radically to determine our feelings, and sometimes to make the same things in a high degree pleasurable, or the reverse. Take, for example, the case of hypocritical pretense of friendship, and designing arts to procure our favour. Ignorant of their nature, these pretensions, if not too gross, might be sources of gratification to us, but the discovery of their true character makes them in the highest degree repulsive, nothing being altered but our knowledge. A similar effect may be produced in the opposite direction. The apparent aversion or coldness of a beloved person may be turned into a source of joy, if it be discovered to depend on real regard. It is in the power, therefore, of the discovery of an unknown or unregarded fact to alter our feelings, even to invert their natural character, to make unpleasing that which is naturally pleasant, or to render the highest measure joyful that which is naturally repugnant. This power is in the knowledge where there has been ignorance. It does not alter our natural emotions. It still leaves, as in the cases supposed, the manifestations of regard agreeable in themselves, and the tokens of aversion in themselves the source of pain. But it can overrule these primary tendencies, eliciting feelings that are stronger within us than the sensational impressions. We may take another simple case. The loss of a small sum of money is a naturally painful thing. Few persons could avoid a distinct emotion of annoyance from its occurrence. But let a generous man discover that through his loss a dear friend had been largely benefited, and his feeling is entirely changed. The vexation is lost in a stronger pleasure. It is therefore evident that knowledge might alter our whole feeling with respect to the world. The apparent good and evil of life constitute a case in which a truer understanding might invert the natural expression. We need not, therefore, be hopeless in the presence of the problem of pain. Knowledge might alter its entire aspect. Nay, we are not limited to this general thought. For there is one condition under which all know that pain is not truly evil, but a good. This is when pain is willingly borne for another's sake. Its entire character is altered then. It not only passes into the category of good things, but it becomes emphatically the good. Our life has nothing else so excellent to show. All kinds of pleasure fall infinitely below it. Measured by self-sacrifice, by heroism, every other good sinks not only into a lower place, but becomes evidently of a lower kind. Nothing else in the same full and perfect sense deserves or receives the name of good. The homage of all hearts unequivocally affirms this title. Even when there is not manhood enough to imitate, when the baser nature within us prefers the meaner course, the verdict of the soul is never doubtful. The pains of the martyrs, or the losses of self-sacrificing devotion, are never classed among the evil things of the world. They are its bright places, rather, the culminating points at which humanity has displayed its true glory, and reached its perfect level. An irrepressible pride and gladness are feelings they elicit, a pride which no regret can drown, a gladness no indignation overpower. Conceive all martyrdoms blotted out from the world's history, how blank and barren were the page! There are materials, then, evidently within us for the entire inversion of our attitude towards pain. The world in this respect, we might almost feel, seems to tremble on the balance. A touch might transform it wholly. One flash of light from the unseen, one word spoken by God, might suffice to make the dark places bright, and wrap the sorrow-stricken heart from a man in the wonder of an unutterable glory. If all pain might be seen in the light of martyrdom, at the least and lowest in man's poor and puny life, or shall we rather say, in God's great universe, might be interpreted by the best and highest, were not the work done? It is done, for the light has shone, the word is spoken. End of chapter 1. Recording by Ethan D. Gilkey.